The sky does not fall, it ignites. In the first microsecond of contact, the atmosphere is not pushed aside but is instantly compressed into a wall of incandescent plasma. The crust of the Earth, a thin veil of granite and basalt, does not crack, it liquefies. Imagine a world where the very ground beneath your feet becomes a liquid wave, taller than the highest mountains, moving at 20 kilometers per second. This is the moment of contact. The sound is not a bang, it is a roar so profound that it ceases to be audio and becomes a physical force that ruptures every biological cell within a 3,000-kilometer radius. Skyscrapers are not crushed, they are atomized, their steel skeletons turning into a fine metallic vapor before the shockwave even makes physical contact. The oceans do not splash, they flash into steam, creating a vacuum that sucks the remaining air into a pillar of fire reaching toward the edge of the exosphere. This is the end. But to understand why, we must rewind to the beginning. The rewind, the mechanics of the stable world. In the silent, cold vacuum of the inner solar system, stability is a fragile illusion. For 4 billion years, the Earth has moved in a delicate celestial dance, protected by its thick atmosphere and the shielding presence of Jupiter. We measure our safety in the smallness of the debris that usually finds us, tiny grains of dust that burn up as shooting stars, or the occasional rocky fragment that leaves a charred hole in a remote desert. To understand the scale of what is approaching, we must look at the mechanics of our world. The Earth rotates at roughly 1,600 kilometers per hour at the equator. This rotation creates the centrifugal force that subtly bulges our planet at its center. Above us, the magnetosphere, a shimmering cage of magnetic field lines, deflects the solar wind, while the atmosphere exerts a steady pressure of 1 bar at sea level. These are the invisible pillars of our existence. Under normal conditions, inertia keeps our tectonic plates crawling at the speed of fingernail growth, and the law of conservation of energy ensures that the heat from the sun is balanced by the radiation we leak back into the void. The intruder, an atomic decomposition of mass. The intruder is a remnant of the primordial chaos, an object roughly 950 kilometers in diameter. In the catalogue of the cosmos, we might call it a dwarf planet, similar in mass and scale to Ceres. It has spent eons orbiting in the darkness between Mars and Jupiter, a rogue mountain of silicate rock and iron, possessing a mass of nearly 1 quintillion metric tons. As it enters the Earth's gravitational well, it begins to accelerate. Gravity, the silent sculptor of the universe, pulls it inward with relentless hunger. At 10,000 kilometers away, the asteroid is a second moon in the sky, a pale, terrifying sphere that grows larger every second. At 5,000 kilometers, the gravitational interplay begins to tug at the Earth's crust. Tides in the ocean rise by hundreds of meters, not following the moon, but following the new, dark master of the sky. The weight of this mass creates a gravitational gradient that pulls on the Earth's mantle, causing the very ground to groan and shift. The atmospheric breakdown and kinetic ionization. When the leading edge of the asteroid touches the upper reaches of the thermosphere, the kinetic energy involved is incomprehensible. At the invisible physics layer, kinetic energy is calculated as Ek equals 1/2 mv squared. Because the velocity is so high, reaching over 70,000 kilometers per hour, the energy release is not linear, it is exponential. The air molecules in the path of the asteroid cannot move out of the way. They are trapped between the incoming rock and the surface of the planet. In a fraction of a millisecond, these molecules are crushed together so violently that their electrons are stripped away. The air becomes a hyperheated plasma, reaching temperatures of over 100,000 degrees Celsius, far hotter than the surface of the sun. This is the phenomenon of violet ionization. The sky does not turn orange or red, but a piercing, ultraviolet blue that vibrates with the scream of tearing atoms. As the main body of the Texas-sized object penetrates the stratosphere, it displaces trillions of tons of air. This creates a bow shock of such intensity that the friction alone begins to melt the forward face of the asteroid into a trailing tail of molten glass. The light produced is a blinding radiance that would vaporize the retinas of any living creature for thousands of kilometers. This is not a slow descent. From the moment it touches the atmosphere to the moment it hits the bedrock, less than 5 seconds pass. The moment of total conversion. The impact itself is a total conversion of kinetic energy into heat and pressure. As the iron-rich core of the asteroid slams into the crust, it does not stop at the surface. It punches through the 15 kilometers of the continental crust as if it were tissue paper. It continues deep into the mantle, creating a transient cavity over 400 kilometers wide and 100 kilometers deep. The pressure at the point of impact exceeds 10 million bars. Under this stress, rock no longer behaves like a solid, it behaves like a fluid. A massive ejecta curtain of molten stone and vaporized metal is thrown upward, piercing through the atmosphere and into the vacuum of space. This material does not simply disappear. It enters suborbital trajectories, forming a ring of fire around the planet. Hundreds of trillions of tons of white-hot debris begin to rain back down across every continent. As each piece of ejecta re-enters the atmosphere, it acts like a tiny heater. Within 1 hour, the entire sky across the globe turns a dull, glowing red. The thermal radiation from the sky becomes so intense that it is like being inside a global oven. Forests in Siberia, the Amazon, and the Congo ignite simultaneously. The temperature at the surface climbs to over 400 degrees Celsius. Most turn away from the void. But here at Velastrix, we decode the math behind the chaos. Join the archive by subscribing now. The seismic resonance, the ringing bell. While the surface burns, the interior of the planet is undergoing a mechanical transformation. The impact generates seismic waves of such magnitude they are measured not on any human scale, but by the physical displacement of the crust. The entire planet rings like a struck bell. This is the seismic resonance, a series of P waves and S waves traveling through the liquid outer core and the solid inner core. In the opposite side of the world, perhaps in the middle of the Indian Ocean, the ground begins to heave upward by tens of meters as the seismic energy converges at the antipode. This vertical acceleration is so violent that it can launch boulders the size of houses into the air. Every tectonic fault line on Earth is triggered at once. The San Andreas, the Himalayan frontal thrust, the Japanese trench, all slip simultaneously by hundreds of meters. Every volcano, from the Ring of Fire to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, erupts in a synchronized release of pressure. The smell of the air becomes a metallic cocktail of sulfur and vaporized basalt. The oceans, pulverization and vaporization. The oceans, our blue cradles of life, are now scenes of impossible violence. Near the impact site, a tsunami is formed that is not a wave of water, but a wall of displaced sea and pulverized seafloor thousands of meters high. It moves at the speed of sound. As it reaches the shallow continental shelves, it does not just flood the land, it scours it clean, removing the soil and the bedrock down to the mantle. The thermal energy from the impact causes a phase transition in the water. Thousands of cubic kilometers of seawater are instantly converted into superheated steam. This creates a vacuum at the site of the boil-off, which is immediately filled by rushing air, creating a cyclonic firestorm of global proportions. Even on the far side of the globe, the tsunamis arriving hours later are still hundreds of meters tall, erasing every coastal civilization that the initial heatwave had spared. The chemical reset and the acidic sky. Within 3 hours, the atmosphere is no longer composed of the gases we recognize. It is a thick, choking soup of vaporized rock, soot from the global wildfires, and sulfur dioxide released from the punctured crust. The sunlight is blocked entirely. The world enters a state of total, absolute darkness. But it is not cold, not yet. The heat from the impact and the falling debris stays trapped under this thick blanket of ash. The oceans begin to boil at their surfaces, sending even more water vapor into the air, creating a runaway greenhouse effect that will last for decades. The chemistry of the world is broken. The high temperatures of the impact have caused the nitrogen and oxygen in the air to bond, forming trillion-ton clouds of nitric acid. When the first rains finally fall, they are not life-giving. They are a concentrated acid that dissolves the shells of marine life and the leaves of the few plants that haven't burned. The carbon cycle is halted. The oxygen-producing plankton in the sea are erased as the top layers of the ocean become a toxic, superheated sludge. The long cooldown, the aftermath of the kinetic reset. As the years pass, the heavy dust slowly begins to settle, but the world it reveals is unrecognizable. The continents have shifted by several meters in a matter of hours. The Earth's rotation has been altered, possibly shortening the day by several seconds or changing the axial tilt. The Moon, our constant companion, now looks down upon a world that glows with the dim, angry light of cooling magma. The silicate vapor in the atmosphere has condensed into billions of tiny glass spheres, tektites, covering the entire surface of the planet in a gray, abrasive grit. Life, if it persists at all, is relegated to the deepest hydrothermal vents of the abyss or perhaps a few kilometers deep within the terrestrial crust, where extremophile bacteria continue their slow metabolism, indifferent to the firestorm above. For the surface dwellers, the biological cessation is absolute. There are no fossils left to find in the impact zone, for the rock that would have held them was vaporized and scattered into the stratosphere. The Texas-sized asteroid is not a bringer of change, it is a reset button for a planetary system. It reminds us that our solid ground is merely a thin, cold scab on a ball of molten iron, floating in a shooting gallery of cosmic proportions. We exist in a brief window of geological silence, a pause between the great impacts that shape the evolution of worlds. The math of the universe is indifferent to our survival, governed only by the cold laws of mass, velocity, and gravity. To explore the impossible and visualize the unknown, subscribe to Velastrix.